Welcome to Access Your Leadership, where we share inspiring career stories and talk about ways you can level up your own leadership potential. I'm your host and coach, Hakim Lakhdar, and today I'm here with Shireen Halal. Shireen is the CEO of Maior Strategic Consulting, which brings operational and strategic support to professional service firms frustrated by flat revenue and falling margins. If they're stuck putting out fires instead of fueling growth, or they're disappointed by outdated strategies that no longer deliver, Shireen is the one you want to talk to. Shireen, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. We've always had such great conversation, and it's fun to finally go on the record.
I know. We were talked about LinkedIn Lives. We talked about, doing these little short. I said, look, let's just get something recorded and then we can see where it goes from there. So I'm so excited to have this conversation because, as you said, they're always rich and, eye-opening and insightful, especially the unique perspective that you have, and then my perspective from the leadership angle. But before we get into that, and I'm excited to, do you have a leadership win of self or of others, personal or professional, that you'd like to share today?
Yeah, I actually have two. I have one that I think is the more traditional answer, and then I have one that's sort of a little less traditional. So I think one of the wins I'm most proud of is when I was the COO of a national law firm. It was an inaugural position, so I was the first person in that role. We were trying to get a grasp of the firm's operations, and I was trying to get an understanding, of course, of where I had the right people in the firm that could help to actually push through and execute on initiatives. And we had a very bright receptionist in the LA office who I noticed just consistently had great ideas and just was sort of, I would say, stuck in the role. And so I promoted her to be the head of the assistants in the LA office. And then I ended up promoting her again. Long story short, within a year and a half, she was my LA office operations manager. And when I left that firm, she left and became the director of operations at a creative agency. And so I'm really proud of that one because letting somebody break the mold and be the best they can be without having sort of rigid definitions or preconceived notions of what people are good at and what they're allowed to accomplish within your organization. I think it's a win for everybody, obviously. What a benefit to the organization to have this person who's now contributing at a level that is just multitudes beyond.
Yeah.
And the loyalty that I fostered there. Wow. I mean, this is somebody who to this day is like, Shireen, you tell me when you're ready. You know that I'll come and join your firm any day.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that one. And I want to hear your second one because I think what that, from a leadership perspective, I think it's so easy for us to place people in boxes and just assume. And I even, when I'm talking to clients who bring up this struggle that they may find themselves in, even if they're in senior roles, I've been in this role, I'm quote unquote stuck in this role, and they're trying to figure out how to navigate their career or, their role within a company. And I said, look, sometimes you get in this box and it'll feel like you're being moved around the room, but you're just being moved around in the same box.
Yeah.
You've got to break out of that and genuinely break down the walls and create no limits so that your potential can be realized. And for you to create an environment and for you to spot talent like that says a lot about what you're focused on. I love that.
It's one of the most rewarding things, right? Finding like an underutilized
There's the word.
resource and
Yeah,
and getting better for everybody. Like it was better for her. She gets
sure.
promoted, she gets paid more, she's doing something she's good at. What a win for the organization. It's great. I would say the other one, and this one's less traditional. When I started my firm, it was really important to me to be a thought leader. And so it's important to build something that doesn't just solve issues for my clients. If you truly believe you're at the top of what you do, which I would think any of us as business owners, you
Right.
don't start your own firm without believing that this is your super skill, right? Like this is your special sauce. You have a real obligation in my mind to share your ideas and lead the conversation. And so I sit on the advisory board of an accounting firm. I write a quarterly column for managing partners of law firms in Law 360. It's fun. It's like a Dear Abby for law firm leaders. As you know, I speak at conferences and on podcasts like this. I write white papers regularly. It's important to me that our firm is putting out the latest on trends and how our clients and just others who want to read about it can overcome common hurdles that I see happening in the marketplace. And I believe in sharing insights very generously because driving meaningful thought leadership isn't just good business. It's how you challenge others to think differently and evolve.
Mhm.
And I feel that that's what being a leader is.
Yeah. I've seen your content online. It's fantastic. And
Thank you.
it's super generous. Generous is the perfect word for it because I think there's so much withholding because of the certain mindset that business owners are in, a little bit of the scarcity mindset that if I
Oh
give it
yeah.
all away, what will my competitors do with it? Or why would clients then come to me if I'm giving them, I'm sort of giving away the whatever the expression is. It's like, well, not necessarily, because are you in the business just to sort of hoard clients, or are you actually in this business to create some real change and some real impact?
And the
That,
truth is, when you're willing to do that, the clients come
yes.
very easily and naturally. And the
Yeah.
truth is, you don't have to sell. So I don't sell. I offer to be a sounding board.
Hmm.
And that's a very authentic offer if you know me because you see how generous I am
Hmm.
with my content, with my ideas. I never mind jumping on the phone and just brainstorming with a managing partner. That person may never hire me.
Mm.
That's okay. A lot of them do eventually.
Yeah.
Or when they're ready, they know who to call. Or I'll get a call from someone else later and it's so and so gave me your name and said you're fantastic. I don't need everybody to hire me. If you can
Right.
take the idea and run with it, I'm happy for you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's funny because you think about all of those business owners out there who are looking for like this like silver bullet solution to how do I generate business? How do I get clients? And yes, there are more marketing strategies out there and many of them are valid, but the way you just described that is so simple is it's just sort of the strategy of service. And
Be
I,
the go-to person
yeah, right, being
and
a
people will go
resource.
to you.
Right. Exactly right.
Period.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to talk about the topics that we always get into whenever we get into a conversation, but tell us a little bit about your journey and what's led you to where you are now doing what you do.
Yeah, good question. I've had a really fun ride. So, Maior's foundation is shaped by my career, probably the same as most entrepreneurs. I spent the first decade as a litigator at AmLaw 100 firms and was one of those people who it was my turn to make partner in the next few years next in my group and realized I don't want to do this another 35. So, the piece I loved was running the business side. So I transitioned to operations and strategy. I had the opportunity to, like I said, I served as a COO of a national law firm, over 20% top line revenue increase, over 30% bottom line. I pivoted BDO's consulting division. I led a division at KPMG. I led the growth division of a communications consulting firm. And those experiences exposed me to best practices. But what's interesting is as I went from large enterprise firm to large enterprise firm, there were professionals leaving and starting their own practices, right? So, like lawyers who are leaving big law or accountants leaving KPMGs and going to a regional firm.
Mm,
And I get those calls asking, Shireen, you're doing all these great things for these other organizations. What's like the easy bite-sized version that I can do as a more boutique or mid-sized firm? And it made me realize that there was a real gap in the market for that level of experience and proven track record, but for the smaller firms. And so what's interesting is, as much as I had already learned best practices, helping the owners of smaller firms, those leaders who are hyper driven, decisive, and focused, requires more than cookie cutter practices.
Hmm.
There's no large layers of global boards. There isn't slow decision making. These are businesses that thrive on speed and impact, and every employee makes a difference.
Yeah.
And so, what's really fun is you can move fast, see results right away. And while I loved the time that I spent in those executive roles, there's nothing more rewarding than building my own business and helping these other business owners build theirs too.
Yeah, well said. And the way you describe it and knowing you as I do, it suits your personality so perfectly
Oh my
because
gosh, really it does.
the relationship side of what you do is so crucial to create that rapport, to create that trust, to be that trusted advisor that you become requires a complex understanding of operations and strategy at the level that you had worked in for many, many years, and then to distill it down into this sort of tailor-made solution or opportunity or possibility for the clients that you're working with. And for you to be able to do that while also fostering a really strong relationship with them, I can only imagine what that's like.
Well, they go hand in hand. I
Yeah.
think you nailed it. And so, what really sets my firm apart and where my clients get something different and where there really was a gap in the market that I'm filling, we have a very practical, hands on approach. And so, I can't tell you how many accounting firm leaders, PR firm leaders, law firm leaders have said, oh, we've hired people and we end up with some 150-page PowerPoint deck and are told, here's the great plan. We don't do that. First of all, we don't create strategy in a vacuum and lob it over the net. I spend an insane amount of time getting to know the client, walking through and meeting people, and understanding what can this group of people execute and deliver. And then I stay involved to make sure that those strategies are implemented, iterated, and refined for real success. I hold my firm to an obsessive level of quality, from the clarity of our solutions to the
Mm,
sharpness of the deliverables. And so it simply is not enough to give a cookie cutter solution from 10,000 feet if the people in the business don't have time or the skill to reasonably execute it.
yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And as my ear is trained to listen for things like golden nuggets, the word that keeps popping out as you were explaining that so well is people, 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 people. So as we think
Oh,
about
totally.
the people, because I think it's so easy when we start talking about the profits, it's so
Yeah.
easy to forget about the people and how each individual contributes to those profits. So, in sort of align with conversations we've had in the past, let's talk a little bit about, because look, it's all towards growth and scaling and profits. We know that. I just did a workshop earlier today where I was showing my results triangle where I said, look, I know everything that we're working towards is results, an outcome of some sort, some level of success. Yes, and that may be the bottom line that we're referring to, but what does that involve? And on an individual level, it involves things like clarity and confidence that we can create in who we are and how we lead ourselves and others, all of that. But from your perspective, what is the relationship between people and profits, and how that impacts culture and all of that?
I think you can't separate them at all. Especially, I mean, look, maybe I'm biased because I've always worked in and now I work with professional services firms. I mean, these are operations where the people are your product, right? And so an engaged workforce, first of all, it's not even optional, Hakeem. And I would argue, and you would know this better than me because I think you have a wider breadth and you see products and some things outside of professional services. I don't know that it's optional in any business because where are you getting these great results if not from your people? Do you think that there's any amount of marketing or branding out there that can outsmart bad service or an employee that's having a terrible day and treats your client badly or a major issue that just is left to fester and you haven't followed up on it long enough? These are real issues and I don't think you have a choice. And so if you want to bring top line or bottom line revenue up, the answer always lies in the people. I think the right framework, you first have to know, what are we good at?
Mhm,
What's really, I mean, look, you're not going to be good at everything.
mhm,
Nobody is. Pick the things that are your eights and higher. It's easier to make an eight into a 10 and have that make a big impact in the market. Turning your two into a four, what's that really going to do for you?
mm,
Probably not much. And so first focus on turning your strengths into systemic wins, right? And so maybe you pick one area at a time, one a month or one a quarter. And perhaps it's something like, we know we have good client communication, but we're going to have the best client communication.
mm,
Every department or practice area has to pick one initiative that they're going to dig into and focus on to make that into reality. And by the way, that's even if you're back office. Everybody plays a role in better client communication.
yeah,
So you do that, you center around it. And then if every month you're picking one thing, you get to excellence. And part of that is you're building clarity around what good looks like. And then you have to empower your team with the tools and accountability to deliver.
mm,
And so that means actually being transparent and treating these people like adults. You don't have to give them all the financial detail,
mm.
but this thing where it's just bill more, try harder, work faster, to what end? Right? And
Yeah.
so if instead you have even an all hands call every month where you're very honest with your workforce about, here's where we're knocking it out of the ballpark, and here's where we've had some real issues that we've seen in how our services deliver, our pricing, what you pick the thing, talk about it with the people in your firm and enable and empower them to do something about it
Yeah.
within bounds, right? And let excellence be part of your DNA. I think then the next piece of it is like not talking about values and instead talking about real promises. And so, we talk about values on websites, platitudes like trust. What does that mean?
Mhm,
It's not actionable. Instead, you could say, this is a firm with flexible accountability. So, what that means is we let you work remotely and you don't have to stick to strict 9 to 5 hours, but you need to submit time entries every single day so that we have visibility, we can plan for capacity,
mhm.
we can have our financial projections correct. And that's a trade off. It's a promise, right? So I guess let me pause there. Does that resonate?
I love the distinction between values and promises. I think that's really powerful because, as you know, I'm all about values. And I'm thinking about values oftentimes from the individual leader's perspective. So, what are your values? How do those align with either the values you have on a website or those that sort of permeate your company culture? How do you know they're aligned if you don't know what your values are? So, I think there's an important piece to it there, but then as it translates to how you create a culture and how that relates to your employees, I think promises actually is quite powerful and resonates a lot more with people than, you know, referencing your cute acronym for values, or, sending everybody a web link and saying, don't forget our values are on page one of our website. But the thing that I want to go back to, which I think is really interesting, is the way you were talking about the capacity that people have to do the work, to feel empowered. And I'm
Mm,
curious, obviously, people are working with an organization because they feel connected, hopefully, to the mission, to the work. They feel capable of doing good work and adding value and feeling valued. When you're having conversations with your clients, is this obvious to them? Is this something that's on their mind already? Or is this require a bit of education, some further like exploration?
you know, I think most of them need a little bit of a reset, but the good news is if you're a firm that's working with me, you've already recognized I want better. I'm not okay with good enough.
Mm,
And so I'm lucky that it's almost a bit of a self-selection exercise if you're going to work with a firm like mine. I mean, you get amazing results, but it may mean you actually have to change things, right?
Yeah.
And so the firms I work with, that's very clear. And if they're not willing to get on board, why would you work with me? Just
Right.
pick a traditional consultant. That's
Right.
fine. And you can get traditional results that way. But, one of the things I do when I come in is I ask to really speak with a wide variety of people. And so where they don't always get it, for example, I had a firm where they had a very high accounts receivable balance. Well, first of all, you don't really have a bill pay problem. The problem goes way further back. Your client's expectations when they signed a retainer letter are different than the bill that they got.
Hmm.
So you have a communication issue. You may have a value issue in terms of how your partners are phrasing what's going on so that clients aren't actually seeing progress and value in their mind when they get the bill. Otherwise, they wouldn't be pushing back,
Hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. But one of the first questions I asked was, what does your team in billing have to say? What are the reasons that clients are giving them that they're not paying? Oh, we haven't asked them. Really? So what's interesting is how many firms, and this is, I think, across the board, how many firms think innovation happens in the boardroom when the truth is most of your great ideas kind of come from the front lines. And as I go through and talk to people, I want to speak with your receptionist. I want to speak with your paralegals. I want to speak with the assistants. Of course, I want to speak with your equity partners too. But I want to really understand what are the real roadblocks and perceived roadblocks that people have to delivering the way you think they should deliver?
Mm.
And what ideas do they have which haven't surfaced because they know what's really happening in the business?
Yeah.
A managing partner,
Yeah.
right? Because how many places can that person be at once?
Right.
They can't.
Right. It's so great you're highlighting this because I think about this even in my one-on-one conversations where there are no direct, at least in the one-on-one conversation I'm having in that moment, there are no direct implications to being open and honest about what the issues are. And the resistance that you see, at least initially from even my one-on-one clients, to peel back some of the layers, it can be shocking when you're in a conversation like that and you're thinking, okay, well then what are we here for? This is exactly what we're working towards, is to
Yeah,
uncover these unknowns or to highlight these blind spots and to then say, are these impacting your business? Are they impacting your leadership in the context of what I do?
right,
If so, let's talk about them openly. There's no judgment here. There's no slap on the wrist. It's just for progress towards what you're trying to achieve. And if you're resistant to that, so I'm thinking about this as you're sharing that with me and the conversations you have with the paralegals, with the receptionist, with junior employees at the
yeah.
firm or in the organization. How do you frame that as you're talking to clients that there's such value in that?
I don't know any other way. And maybe it's because I didn't start as a consultant, right?
Mhm.
And so I've been in executive roles and I know the amount of buy-in you need for programs to succeed. Luckily, I'm a people person, as you know, but I mean, look, you can cram down a policy and then be stuck policing it. I'd rather take the easy road, which is if you get people excited about something. And so, by the way, the only way that happens is you listen. So you do a
Yes.
listening tour first.
Yes.
That's also where I'm identifying who are going to be my champions and my biggest critics when I do start rolling out programs, and how do I engage those people. I think a lot of leaders make the mistake of not engaging the critics because, well, they're not going to champion this. Here's the problem, they're speaking anyway.
Hmm.
Get them involved in the process, put them in your pilot program if you're going to try something new.
Hmm.
Let them know you have a special role in helping us to identify what's going to be wrong. Let them do what they do best, right?
Right.
But when you've already taken the time to get to know them, then when you bring them a program, it's not, who are you to tell us how to do this?
Right.
Instead, it's Shireen gets it.
Yeah.
She took the time, she understands, And she's willing to work collaboratively with us to shape how it turns out. And so I also just gave like a little tip, which is do a pilot program, right?
Right.
Let people be part of the process.
Yes.
You also, again, you can't just cram everything down. You can, but how well does that work?
Yeah. It's about leaning in. I mean, from a leadership perspective, so many leaders, I don't mean to generalize, but so many leaders are looking for validation. They're looking for affirmation of what they think is the right way. And the beautiful part of what you described as, sort of engaging the critics is part of that empowerment process. Like empower them so that they're criticizing not for criticizing's sake or just simply to push back, but so that they're contributing to an improved process.
Right.
Now,
Make the
now they're
program
now
better.
they're invested, right? They're
Yes.
invested because that's you're communicating the value of what they have to offer, not admonishing them for being critical of it. And it may be again, culture has an impact. Talking about culture has an impact. Is this a culture where people just like poo poo everything because they don't like when initiatives or policies are administered from the top? Or do they recognize that they're going to be a part of it too? So their criticism is actually
Yeah.
constructive, not necessarily just combative or confrontational. And I think leaders are also avoidant of that interaction because they just assuming that someone's being critical to pick a fight when actually they may be your most passionate champions ultimately because they see the holes. They just want a voice. They want to be seen. They want to be heard.
I think that's right. And that's kind of the perfect segue to a broader problem, which
Mm,
is, and I'm sure you've seen this, it's there's a lot of leaders who think it's their job to create the culture or that culture is something that comes from like Moses is bringing it down from the mountain. And the truth is, everybody's involved in your culture, whether you like it or not, everybody shapes it. And so let people shape it
yeah.
and let them co-create it. It's one thing I like to say, and I know you've heard me say, it's like culture has cult in it. So develop believers
Mm,
and let them contribute. And so maybe what that means is instead of having these lunch and learns in your law firm where it's the practice group leader of every department each month, have the associates arrange it. What do you need to know? I mean, these are the younger generation that actually need the learning. So why don't you let them pick the topic that they care about or the things that they're hearing about that they struggle with in the day-to-day practice? How about if you're looking at your onboarding process, why don't you ask the last five people who joined the firm, what did you think of our onboarding process and what improvements do you have? Let people contribute to evolving your firm.
I'll never forget a conversation I had with a client that got pretty heated where they were pushing back so aggressively about it is my job as a leader to have all the answers. And it was,
Wow.
I mean, it was just so interesting because I was like, well, I could
A
diffuse
hard
this.
place.
I could diffuse this, or I could, pivot and go a different direction, or I can stay in the conversation because I think there's real gold on the other side of this. So I stayed in the conversation and it was beautiful as, in the way that it ended up. But this individual was really committed to this idea that I have the answers and I've got to tell everybody what the right way is and what the answer is. So when they come to me and they ask, I tell them I have the answers. And you alluded to this earlier, which is it's not about having all the answers. It's not about telling. It's about listening. It's about asking the right questions. And when you talk about culture and having buy-in from people and, influencing, inspiring them to become believers, as I tell my clients all the time, it's about creating the environment for that to emerge. Because if you're just putting it in a one-page document and mass emailing it to everybody, well, guess what? They've got no part of that. There's no heart in that.
There isn't. It's also, unless you have incredibly rigid SOPs with something like, I'm in a factory and I'm churning out this pen,
Yes.
it needs to look exact. It needs to have this on one end and this on the other, and it needs to look exactly the way it is on the website. I mean, okay, then you're in a very commoditized business.
Mm,
For the rest of us, don't you want your employees to know and have a gut feel of what good looks like and understand when to give more detail to a client because this is somebody who doesn't have the background versus this person's done this process 18 times. So I'm just going to give them three crisp bullet points. And so there isn't one right answer.
mm,
And it's more about empowering them, show them, don't tell them
yeah,
how to make good decisions.
yeah,
I think what's also sad for that leader is, wow, what a difficult role if you have to know everything. And
yes.
it sounds like this person can't rely on anyone in their team
Mm,
to take the next step. Um,
hmm
I mean, my first hire at Maior was somebody who has a completely different skill set than me because I knew I could only afford somebody pretty junior
hmm
at the time, right? I was just
hmm
starting.
hmm
So, me hiring a mini Shireen, I'm just going to run circles around that girl.
Yeah.
I hired someone instead who's like a data guru, coding genius, research ninja, because that's awesome. I go to her, she solves it. I don't, I mean, I'm grateful that I have somebody and that's what I look for, right? Is bring something different and do it better than me.
Yeah. Well, this and it was not planned. You tee me up perfectly to just sort of reinforce this idea around self-leadership because that all comes back to the individual. What are you afraid not having the answer says about you? What is it,
I love that word, self-leadership.
and what does it say that you feel like you can't trust or rely on these people? And they'll
Right.
often be quick to say, no, no, I trust them, I rely on them, but I feel like it's my job, it's my role, it's why I'm the leader. I'm like, I don't know who told you that along the way, but that's not true. Your job as a leader is to develop your people so they can be the best version of themselves. Then you watch performance soar, and so does the success of your business.
Yeah,
If you think you've got to shoulder all of that all the time and have all the answers every time, to your point, that's not sustainable. That's exhausting.
it sure is.
And
It
one last thing I'll just say, just to
yeah,
just to sort of piggyback on that, is that that's why you hear so many leaders say it's lonely at the top. I have nobody to talk to about this. I'm
right.
like, well, that doesn't have to be that way, but you've created this image or this environment where you're the only one with the answers, or at least the right answers. And yeah, that probably does feel a bit isolating, a bit lonely. So sorry, you were saying.
No, it does. And I think we all feel like that a little
Mm,
from time to time, but it's a good point that if you feel like that all the time, maybe you're not letting anybody in. But it reminds me of an anecdote I heard, which was apparently someone once asked President Roosevelt, what's the hardest part about being president? And he said, signing a bad letter. And so, like, the lesson in it is no one's going to do things exactly like you, but you got to pick and choose your spots. And so, of course, there's like the super important things that you have to have last eyes on, but that can't be every single thing in your business.
right.
And sometimes it's not going to be done perfectly. I would go a step further, and I think you would too, from the conversation we just had, and said, maybe somebody actually wrote a better letter. It just wasn't your style.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe they thought more about that audience than you did because you're too busy and you don't know the details. So I think that's probably equally true.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned the style because I'll be giving a workshop and I'll talk about leadership styles and I'll list 14 different leadership styles and we'll go through what each of them looks like and what that entails and pros and cons of each. And at the end, I'll ask the group, which one do you think is the best leadership style? And everyone will start putting it in the chat or, if we're in person, they'll start offering up their ideas or suggestions. And the reality is none of them is the right style. None of them is the best style. The best leaders are able to toggle through those based on the situation, based on the person that they're working with, and being able to recognize that so that you know what is maybe your default style or your preferred style to work and lead, I imagine has a massive impact on hiring. And you mentioned hiring and how you're bringing the right people into an organization, or, Jim Collins says the right people on the bus.
Right.
What is your involvement with hiring and ensuring that people are in the right places, doing the right things? You alluded to that leadership win earlier. Where does that play into some of the work that you do too?
So it kind of ties back in part to the promises, or at least that's sort of, I think, the cornerstone. So what I've created for many of the firms I work with is sort of a real brand promises document. And so it goes beyond values and
Mhm.
platitudes to here's what we commit to doing for you. And here are the clear expectations of what we expect you to do for us. If you have that down and crispy, when you're interviewing people, and this is not like a first round interview,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah,
when you're a couple rounds in and you feel pretty confident about someone, or at least you feel like the conversation's moving in the right direction, that's when it's time to show them this document and say, we want to be super transparent about who we are and what works in this environment because we're great, but we're not great for everyone. And I think something a lot of companies are afraid to do is sort of break out of just doing everything everyone else does because it's table stake. I mean, forget it.
yeah,
Be you, be honest about what works, be honest about the expectations, and then hold people to it and give them room to fulfill it, right? And so
yeah.
you get better candidates when you're very clear. It's funny we're having this conversation because literally right after recording, I'm interviewing two people back to back for my own firm. And I'm going to be hyper honest about here's what I know won't work. Here's the personality traits or work styles that I know just won't fit well.
Yeah,
And it's sort of my obligation to tell that to people, right? Because I want the right person in for me. And I
sure.
want somebody who's excited and can thrive on this platform. And if they can't, they deserve to be somewhere better for them.
100%. It's so refreshing to hear that. And I imagine it's refreshing for the candidates too. I've been in my own job interviews where I've thought, like, what are you not telling me here?
Right.
And I would much rather have someone be upfront with me and then me come into a role and say, I knew what to expect. I know what's expected of me.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that it goes back to this idea, which is one of my first C's, is clarity. Clarity on who we are as an organization, who we are as leaders, how I lead, how I want people to feel being led by me. And that clarity piece is so important, and it takes time, and it takes sometimes, oftentimes, support, which is why we
Yeah.
do what we do, to say, here, I'm going to hold up the mirror to you. Do you like what you see? And if the response is, well, I didn't know it looked like that, or what am I looking at, or I don't like what I see, well, then there's some work to be done.
Right.
And it's very rare that when that mirror, sort of that metaphorical mirror gets held up, that someone says, "Oh, yes, I love that. That's exactly what I wanted." Because not a lot of people invest the time and energy and money to actually unpack this and say, well, what is it that I like that we're doing? What is it that I don't like that we're doing? What's working? What's not working? And that
Yeah.
process takes a real open minded growth mindset individual and leader, especially when you're talking about business owners, to say, it's not just me here. This isn't just what feels good for me on a day to day, but actually, how is this impacting the people who work here and the work that they then produce?
The clarity is key. Kind of going back to that process I explained where I kind of run through the firm and I read the handbook, I read the processes, I'm talking to a representative sample, depending on how large the firm is.
Hmm.
I mean, usually what that ends up at is a report or meeting with the executive committee where I give them my findings. And I almost always hear some of this was really difficult for us to hear,
Yeah.
but thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying it because you somehow articulated what we've felt, but couldn't describe well.
Yeah.
And look, like that's step one, right? Is just clarity. Like, can we
Right.
all get on the same page about what's really going on here and where we need to make some real improvements?
Yeah. Well, and the beauty of what you do, and similar to what I do in a different capacity, is I don't have any agenda here except your success. I am a
That's right.
champion for your success. So I'm not coming here to knock you down a peg. I'm not coming here to score a point against you. I'm sharing what the reality is, what the truth is here. And once we can get clear on that, now we can start figuring out where we want to go next. So go
I
ahead, I'll
think
let you
that's
finish.
right. And here's reality. If a couple months go by and you don't see that anything I'm doing is working, you're not going to continue working with
Mhm.
me. So, if anything, my only incentive is you and your results. And do I think what I'm bringing to you is going to show up in top line revenue, bottom line profitability improvement, less attrition, happier people,
Yeah,
or client satisfaction? If I can't check those boxes for you, what are we doing here?
right. Well, I love that. And I remember someone telling me, and I'll give him credit, it was Evan Neerman of Red Banyan who was on the podcast. And he said, in my firm, we don't hire for fit, we hire for mindset.
Oh, I love that.
And I really like that because one, I think it's something that leaders should really grab hold of. But even as a service provider doing the work that I do and the work that you do, I'm also hiring clients. I'm bringing clients on, not for fit only, but for mindset. What kind of mindset are you in? Are
Yeah,
you open to these conversations? Are you capable of hearing these hard truths at times? And do you
right.
see them as an opportunity for growth and greater awareness and some real action that moves the needle? If not, then this is sort of not worth either of our time or money.
That's right, because there's only so much I can do. I can bring you the ideas. I can help you execute, but you got to be willing to do it, right?
Yeah. So I'm mindful of time. I mean, there's so many leadership. I was really holding back because I didn't want to like make this all about like leadership, because I find the work that you do so interesting. But there are so many parallels, obviously, to the work that I'm doing individually with leaders,
Oh yeah.
and then what you're doing sort of on a, an enterprise or organizational level.
It's why
And
we always have great conversations.
it is, and I love that. If someone's listening and they're thinking to themselves, okay, you have a lot of access to leaders, you see effective leadership, ineffective leadership, leadership that has a negative impact on culture and creates a incredibly positive and enriching culture. What is a leadership skill or attribute that you think listeners ought to focus on if they want to become better leaders?
Yeah, one of the biggest ones I think that makes a big improvement, speed.
Mm,
Keep going, keep moving, spend less time on analysis and more time testing in the market and doing, because no battle plan survives contact anyhow. And people who have a bias for action always have an advantage. We are in the age of acceleration. So I don't even think it's a choice.
wow.
Move fast enough to adapt, but steady enough not to lose your way. And so this doesn't mean you have to be reckless. I kind of nodded to it earlier, but test things. So instead of rolling out a program throughout your entire organization, ask two of your great longstanding clients if they don't mind being the beta test on a new idea you're trying out.
Mm,
Or talk to your clients and ask, what do you think before you roll it out?
love
Maybe
that.
it's an internal project. Try it as a pilot program. Do it within one team or one group. And so I always try to ask myself when I'm trying out a new program, what is the smallest, cheapest way to test it before we have to fully invest?
Mm,
But the truth is, you gain clarity through action, not through PowerPoint slides.
yeah, 100%. And I've got my washer on my wrist. It says execute.
That's right. Get out there.
And it has so much to do with that clarity, that confidence, that ability to make decisions quickly.
Get
And
out and try it.
right, right, it's a sort of messy versus right.
Oh,
And
totally.
it's
And the
just
bigger the organization, the harder it gets. It's the analysis paralysis,
yeah,
it's meeting after meeting. It's, oh, well, we did this market analysis. And what do you mean market analysis? Ask your three best clients
right,
and try it with one.
right,
Like, let's move.
yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. What a great response. Speed for sure. Well, if you could just give us a little bit about where people can find more about what you do and how they can contact you if they want to find out more about you individually.
Yeah, absolutely. You can always find me through my website or on LinkedIn. I'm Shireen Halal, Shireen. Last name is Hilal. And my company, Maior, is Maior. And so it's maiorconsultants.com. And would always love to brainstorm with leaders who just have questions and maybe want to stress test an idea.
Awesome. And I'll put all of that in the show notes so that people have links if they want to reference it. I
Great.
know that you always have such great insights. You always have such great questions. Anybody who has an opportunity to be in conversation with you will surely gain something from that conversation. And at the very least, enjoy meeting you and talking to you as I have today. Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me, friend.
Yeah, first of many, right?
Oh, yeah.
Looking forward to it. As always, I'd love to hear from you about the episode. What came up for you as you think about leveling up your own leadership game? And please, if you enjoyed the episode, I encourage you to like and subscribe. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn at Hakim A. Lakhdar or lakdarcoaching.com. Thanks for tuning in. Keep being great. We'll see you next time.